Everyone shall be subject only to such limitations as are determined by law solely for the purpose of securing due recognition and respect for the rights and freedoms of others, and of meeting the just requirements of morality, public order, and general welfare in a democratic society. These rights and freedoms may in no case be excised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations, i.e. refer to the Charter. So I think that's good. So what it's trying to say, what I read it to, is that you do live in a community, you do have a duty to that community, and I think that was the main concern. Let me move on to the concept of community rights. And a lot of my work, my career, has been spent in this strange world where individual and community rights have either clashed or coexisted or found a way to live together. And it goes back to our friend in the taxi in Belfast, doesn't it really? As far as I'm concerned, and I may be in a majority and a minority outcome, on no whole of this, human rights and equality stem from the same source. Others will say that they don't. Some lawyers will argue that what I'm saying is nonsense, and the two ideas come from different strands. Others will argue they will emanate from those strands. Indeed, in the common law system which is used in England and Ireland, the equality legislation seems to take its lead from EU law, whilst human rights law comes from the UN Covenant, or actually more specifically, it comes from the European Convention of Human Rights, which was actually drawn up before the Covenant. Others will try and set it differently, that there are rights of the individuals, as laid out by the Universal Declaration, which we've discussed already, is a document between the state and the individual, and group of collective rights based on gender, race, religion, age, denomination, sexual orientation, disability, etc. The list of characteristics seems to extend on and on. Indeed, here in Ireland, there is a separate equality authority, and there's an Irish Human Rights Commission. The same model is used in Northern Ireland. In Great Britain, however, you have an Equality and Human Rights Commission. This sort of, do we combine them, don't we, exists across Europe. Sometimes you have separate, sometimes they come together. And if you look across the Commonwealth, Australia and New Zealand, and Canada, which were the forerunners to some of this, again, you have a mixed bag. Much of the issues that I've dealt with in my career stem, as I said, from this notion. There are a set of equalities which exist to eradicate discrimination, whether direct or indirect, against a person belonging to a distinct group or having a distinct characteristic. So the issue has arisen from time to time. What should we do if there is a clash between communities? A conflict between an individual, human rights, and the rights of the community to express themselves or to stop those discrimination against a certain community through speech or action. And what comes first, individual rights or collective rights? Finally, what happens when two communities feel their rights are being violated, and they feel that they may be violated in contradiction to one another? Can they both be right? The final area of my work, and one that's peculiar, is in the UK there is a third limb to the Race Relations Act, and the public duty of the Race Relations Act, which states that public authorities should promote good race relations, which have now been understood to be community relations. Lawyers don't help us here. Somebody did take a case to court to try and find out what this meant. This is what lawyers are paid to do. The judge was very, very helpful. He was very helpful. He said, I like this piece of legislation, so this Parliament. It should be interpreted as widely as possible, which for lawyers is never a good thing. They want to know exactly what things mean. As a result, it's never simple. And if public authorities in the United Kingdom or Great Britain fail to do good relations adequately, they are in breach of the law. So it is weird. Okay, as I suggested, that you can have a rights-based approach to equality and anti-discrimination issues. The Universal Declaration gives a rights-based approach to many of the equalities we've discussed. It's true there are separate treaties and instruments which the United Nations developed over 70 years, known as treaty instruments. So there is a separate treaty on elimination of racial discrimination, on the rights of women, rights of a child. You go on. And these, but in the last 6 or 7 years since we've had the Human Rights Commission, I'm aware tonight I'm competing with Mary Robinson. She could come in and explain all this very well. She had a day job doing something around this. Anyway, but under the new system, which actually came in after she left post, there's a universal periodic review. So all governments now have to answer to their treaty obligations, their covenant obligations, their charter obligations. They just have to answer about their human rights. They then have to go back to other smaller committees, which still exist for those treaties, like elimination of racial discrimination, where they're asked again. But still, we're getting there. Let's deal with some of the more complex issues that I've come across in the UK and the United Nations, where I head up an NGO, in practical examples. All this theory is lovely, but let's get down to the practical. The United Nations, for instance, was very reluctant to recognise group rights or collective rights. Why is this? A lot of the UN is based on French notions of jurisprudence. When the UN set up its bodies, it was a much, much smaller place. You have 30, 40 countries voting in 1948. And you can demonstrate the French attitude towards group rights right back to Napoleon. Again, it's my lot he came across. Somebody was moaning about the Jews following the revolution. What's the French Revolution? Equality, liberty, fraternity. So for the first time, Jews were, he actually smashed down ghetto walls. He liked doing that. He went to Italy and smashed lots of walls. He said, "You're free, run Jews, run." You're now citizens, citoyens. And they did, and so they're free, emancipation. But some people were moaning about this. And he did a very French thing. First of all, he set up something called the Sanhedrin. Those of you who do your ancient Judaism will know that the Sanhedrin was a very big course of it was a course in ancient Israel, and only Napoleon could come up with the fact of reviving it. But he asked them some questions about what Jews do, their answers. His conclusion, and it's a conclusion to everything in the Francophone world, or French-based jurisprudence, is this. To the Jews as individuals, he says everything. To the Jews as a nation, nothing. So that's quite interesting. It actually means that we have, even today, getting down to brass tacks, differences in approaches to policing in London and Paris. In London, the approach to policing is you should police by consent, therefore the police should look a bit like the neighbourhood they're policing. So if there's a neighbourhood which has a large Afro-Caribbean community or Turkish community or Jewish community, there will be an attempt, which was successfully, to recruit people from those communities to go out on the street. In France, there would never be such an attempt. You should respect the uniform of the Republic, and to do so would be anti-Republican. But when you've got somebody from the majority culture policing people from minorities, it becomes awfully difficult. And so you go round in a circle. So you have continual riots in Paris. When you have continual riots all over the place, so no one's quite possible. But this attitude of French national identity, citoyenneté, citizenship, and laïcité found its way into the UN. And I was working on very briefly, I'm going to cut this a bit, on something that had been going for 15 years. It was titled, I have to look this up, although I have a huge part in it. I have to look up because it's called the UN Basic Principles and Guidelines on the Right to Remedy and Reparation for Victims of Gross Violations of International Human Rights and on Serious Violations of International Humanitarian Law, passed by the General Assembly in 2005. The reason it's so long is because you have a lot of lawyers involved. So, we were in this working group. A lot of states didn't want to mention group rights. Now, what's the problem? Let's get down to cross sites. This is about serious human rights violations. We're not talking about, again, ice creams being taken away from you on Sunday. We're talking about mass killings and genocide and atrocities and rapes and all sorts of real nasties. So let's think genocide. If you are a dictator who decide to he has, usually, yes, he has a problem with a class of people based on religion, race, in Cambodia based on a social class, an intellectual class. And you decide you're going to wipe them out. The way it works is that if you wipe out a whole family, the property of that family becomes intestate. Most places around the world, when nobody actually owns it, it reverts to the state. So the logic is, if you are a megalomaniac, genocidal dictator, when you usually use those terms, you think the speaker's foaming at the mouth, genocide. But no, but seriously, if you're a genocidal megalomaniac dictator, you are encouraged by international law, until we pass this, to kill as many people as possible. Why? Because the more you kill, the more you will enrich yourself. The more the state will get. So if you wipe out a whole village, the government will claim the land from the village. And that can't be right in terms of natural justice. So we said, it can't be right. I was faced with a little bit of opposition. The European Union opposed me. That was nice. And the United States opposed me. So that was also nice. So we went to explain to them these genocidal problems. The European Union broke in half because it has a unified foreign policy, as you probably know. And it came down to the Germans and the Americans in the end. And we went to the Germans. They weren't quite sure why I was there as a Jewish group. They said, we've settled most of your claims. I said, yes, but we're promoting universal human rights. We're learning from our own experience and helping others. This could be very problematic when it comes to the White Russians, he said. At which point my colleague brilliantly turned around to him and said, so what did you do to the White Russians? And the head of human rights, the former mayor of Frankfurt, went very, very silent and said, you know I can't answer that because it would be a mission. He says, in which case you should either vote or abstain. So we got Germany. The United States, we argued in an airlock. I was taken aside by the lead counsel, stuck between two glass doors, and she said, the preamble mentions the International Criminal Court. I said, it mentions it exists, it does, there's a building, don't worry about it. It doesn't say we have to observe it, so please change your vote. So yeah, we did manage to get that on the UN stuff. You can go on the website and read it. So yeah, we now have that the state must take into interest the concerns of groups. Oh, here we go, got it here. In addition to individuals' access to justice, states should endeavour to develop procedures to allow groups of victims to present claims for reparation and to receive reparation as appropriate. Those words took 15 years, or actually in the UN, 65, 70 years, because they had never mentioned human rights before. As you can see, there are reasons why we have these arguments. Perhaps one of the most depressing times for the UN was on Darfur. Darfur, there are different figures out there. Most claim that 300,000 people were killed through war, disease, starvation, famine, and 2.7 million people fled their homes. We argue the UN should intervene on something called the Genocide Convention, written by, again, it's fine, a guy called Raphael Lemkin. The Genocide Convention says if there's genocide, UN members, signatories to the convention, should go and intervene. And most countries in the world have signed up to this. So they sent out experts to Darfur. What did the experts say? They saw there was clear evidence of mass killings, but was it genocide? So it was sort of asking us how long is a piece of string. I found it one of the most depressing, frustrating, and sickening episodes in my life of hammering the table. Eventually, we did another submission, and at this time, Sudan had something called GINGOs, which are government NGOs, and they basically paid the NGOs. Saying nothing had happened in Sudan. Actually, they said one thing had happened in Sudan. 3 kids had been abducted by a Catholic charity in France and put up for adoption in France. It was a bit of a scandal at the time. They admitted that had happened. But as for the killing of several 100,000 people now, and people get diplomatic corps are pretty annoyed. Most of them are human rights experts, most of them, good, decent human beings, to be honest with you. And this young student spoke. She had a beautiful BBC dialect voice, and she gave this great speech. I've never heard the diplomatic corps clap, sorry. But they clapped her, probably out of frustration. I'm going to turn to two other examples because I'm running out of time, I think. But closer to home. One is on artistic rights and community rights. I was involved in a riot. In Birmingham, sounds like a starter. There was a play in 2004 called Beshti, written by a playwright called Gurpreet Kaur Bhatti. Those who presented her as a young new playwright were probably not quite on the ball. She was an East End scriptwriter, but she'd written a play. And she was Sikh and was based in the Gurdwara Sikh temple, which depicted rape and murder. To cut a long story short, there were riots outside, there was demonstrations outside the theatre, there may have been racism by the theatre staff, there were clashes with the police stopping protesting, then real clashes broke out and there was damage to Birmingham city centre. So I ended up there. The newspapers made it very simple. It was freedom of expression on one side and the rights of the community on the other. And in terms of freedom of expression argument, it's quite simple. Of course the playwright has the right to write what she likes. Does the community also not have a right of freedom of expression to protest quietly and sympathetically? The more we looked at this afterwards, the more we saw the police were stopping them and rioting, or handing out leaflets about, just plain leaflets about what Sikhism was about. It's not how some of the protesters may have had various political ideologies which were more extreme than others, but still, a community has a right to put out leaflets, to protest, and say it doesn't like this. So you've got two freedom of expressions. And that's how a rights-based approach works. I later learned that the theatre had actually gone to the community, performed the play with the community elders and said, what do you think of that? We're going to put it on. Any advice? And the moment you ask that of the community and community leaders, you open up the door to a possible option of editing. They said they didn't like it very much, it didn't depict their community very well. Would you mind terribly acting it? And that's again a frustration. I'm going to jump. I'm going to end to how long do I have? 5 minutes?
Just go.
Go.
Whatever long you want.
Oh, we've got 3 minutes. No, I won't go. I was going to talk about the 7th of July bombings, but I won't. It's too depressing. I'm going to talk about some nice fun things. I think that you need proactive models of community engagement. The more you encourage communities to come together, whether it be artists with religious people, we did a whole project with the Art Council of England and Wales, and religious leaders. How do you develop art with religious communities? How do you understand religious communities whilst developing art? Sat in 2 years on the BBC conference on religion and ethics. Really interesting, but it's, again, working with producers, drama output, news output. Are people like me, you included, are different faiths included? How are they included? I guess a more contemporary question would be, and it relates to Channel 4 programme, do I really want Jews to be portrayed as Jewish mothers? I don't know if anyone's seen it. Has anyone seen the programme? No, good. There's a whole series of 6 programmes about Jewish Mother of the Year. It's very embarrassing. Lots of stereotypes, chicken soup, the whole thing. Woody Allen would be proud. So yeah, or do I want something more serious? And if we have a drama character, it's always my big beat. And when I see American drama characters, they have characters who I recognise. People, well, they might not be like me, but I recognise them amongst my friends. And yes, they happen to come from my religion, and yes, they have problems with that religion, or they struggle with it, or they don't, or they accept it, or they don't. But that's a normal storyline. Increasingly, certainly in British drama, I still see Jews that have to, I do anyway, you'll play back the camera, but shrug and go, oy vey, and a lot of stereotypes, which don't really predict people I know. But I remember people like that from my youth, maybe, they've passed away. So let me look at three proactive models. One is a multi-faith centre we're building at our university. I use this as the first model because we are trying to build a £6-7 million centre, which is a synagogue, a mosque, a space for the seat scriptures, a Buddhist meditation room, ecumenical chapel, etc. But it was designed by students, for students. And I was asked by UK government that came down to me, this is great. Do you think it will be a total waste of what you've done for the last 3 years if the thing doesn't get built? I said, not at all. I said, not at all. In fact, I think every university in the country should have an architectural competition for a multi-faith centre. But I'll tell you why. Because we suddenly had people in the room who had never spoken to each other before. We had Muslims explaining to Jews and Christians why they needed ablution facilities. Jews explaining why they needed a sliding roof for the Festival of Tabernacles. Christians, Muslims and Jews explaining why they all needed to vaguely face east, but some precincts was Mecca, so it was Jerusalem. Everybody explaining why they needed a separate kitchen. That was a big thing. Food is a huge thing. And so on and so forth. Actually, when we started developing it, people were learning ideas from each other. So a lot of my students wanted different Hebrew language newspapers and screens. It was in the early days of the internet and satellite. And all of a sudden, we saw this being mimicked in the Christian chapel, where there suddenly was a plasma screen put into the plans. So again, and when we put in a kitchen, the Muslims said, yeah, we need a kitchen, obviously for iftar. So we were learning from each other and developing it together. So just for that, just for having a few hundred students, and it was hundreds, multi-faith centre, I think that's good. What about football? I chair the FA's Faith and Football Group. On a more serious side, there's a whole issue around faith-based discrimination, racism and terrorism, which we've been dealing with for 5 or 6 years, with mixed success, working with the police, the FA, the Premiership, Football League, you name it, Players Football Association. David Cameron invited us over for afternoon tea, and he got very excited about meeting John Barnes. But anyway, there's now a process between number 10 and the FA, and hopefully we'll get there. But one of the things I like about football is it can be a unifying factor. And we've done certain projects where we brought communities together. We did one in East London, there were 17 different schools. Some were faith schools, some were community schools, which means they're supposed to be mixed, but because of the nature of the area, they weren't. So parents chose, for whatever reason, to send their children to a school where their own ethnic community or their own religious community went to, despite that school having no faith content in it. And we arrived there, and then we had 17 teams, all were, the most we got was that one school had 8 people from one ethnic group and 2 from another. So we had 80% plus from single ethnic groups, and we mixed them up for the day. And we noticed through this that they started to learn and understand each other. So we did this again at Wembley every year with 3 schools, Muslim, Jewish and Catholic surgery, and again, building community relations. And we found out that the more that we, yes, it was nice thing with the kids, they learned about them in single faith schools, they learned about each other, they learned about their religion, their identity. Don't ask me why so many of them supported Spain. I was really depressed. None of them Spanish. It was sort of because they're the best team in the world.